Welcome to day 3 of our read aloud. This is my dog Ginger. She wanted to help read aloud. I don't know how long she's going to stay here, but we'll try it anyway. Remember yesterday, Ramona had written in the book, and so now they're going to find out what happens when they take the book back. Beezus could see that Ramona didn't care. The book was hers, wasn't it? It was paid for, and she could keep it. And that's not fair, thought Beezus. Ramona shouldn't get her own way when she had been naughty. But Miss Evans protested Beezus. If she spoils a book, she shouldn't get to keep it. Now every time she finds a book she likes, she will... Beezus did not go on. She knew very well what Ramona would do. But she wasn't going to say it out loud in front of her. I see what you mean. Miss Evans looked thoughtful. Give me the book, Ramona, she said. Doubtfully, Ramona handed her the book. Ramona, do you have a library card? Miss Evans said. Ramona shook her head. Then Beezus must have taken the book out on her card, said Miss Evans. So the book belongs to Beezus. Why, of course. Why hadn't she thought of that before? It was her book, not Ramona's. Oh, thank you, said Beezus gratefully, as Miss Evans handed the book to her. She could do anything she wanted with it. For once, Ramona didn't know what to say. She scowled and looked as if she were building up to a tantrum. You've got to read it to me, she said at last. Not unless I feel like it, said Beezus. After all, it's my book. She couldn't resist adding. That's no fair. Ramona looked as if she were about to howl. It is too fair, said Beezus calmly. If you have a tantrum, I won't read it to you at all. Suddenly, as if she had decided Beezus meant what she said, Ramona stopped scowling. Okay, she said cheerfully. Beezus watched her carefully for a minute. Yes, she really was being agreeable, thought Beezus with a great feeling of relief. And now that she did not have to read Big Steve unless she wanted to, Beezus felt she would not mind reading it once in a while. Come on, Ramona, she said. Maybe I'll have time to read to you before Father comes home. Okay, said Ramona happily, as she took Beezus's hand. Miss Evans smiled at the girls as they started to leave. Good luck, Beatrice, she said. And now we're on chapter 2, Beezus and her imagination. Look at the picture for this book. I'm kind of interested. It looks like there's 2 police officers with Ramona. I don't know where that's going to go. Beezus and Ramona both looked forward to Friday afternoons after school. Beezus, because she attended the art class in the recreation center in Glenwood Park. Ramona, because she was allowed to go to the park with Beezus and play in the sand pile until the class was over. This Friday, while Beezus held Ramona by the hand and waited for the traffic light to change from red to green, she thought how wonderful it would be to have an imagination like Ramona's. Oh, you know Ramona. Her imagination runs away with her, Mother said, when Ramona made up a story about seeing a fire engine crash into a garbage truck. That child has an imagination a mile long, the Quinby's grown-up friends remarked, when Ramona sat in the middle of the living room floor in a plastic wading pool she had dragged up from the basement and pretended she was in a boat in the middle of a lake. Did you ever see so much imagination in such a little girl? The neighbors asked one another when Ramona hopped around the yard pretending she was the Easter Bunny. One spring day, Ramona had got lost because she started out to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The rainbow had appeared to end in the park until she reached the park, but then it looked as if it ended behind the supermarket. When the police brought Ramona home, Father said, Sometimes I think Ramona has too much imagination. Nobody, reflected Beezus, ever says that about my imagination. Nobody at all. And she wished, more than anything, that she had imagination. How pleased Mrs. Robbins, the art teacher, would be with her if she had an imagination like Ramona's. Unfortunately, Beezus was not very good at painting. At least, not the way Miss Robbins wanted boys and girls to paint. She wanted them to use their imagination and to feel free. Beezus still squirmed with embarrassment when she thought of her first painting, a picture of a dog with bow wow coming out of his mouth in a balloon. Miss Robbins pointed out that only in the funny papers did dogs have bow wow coming out of their mouths in balloons. Bow wow in a balloon was not art. Lay down. When Miss Robbins did think one of Beezus's paintings was good enough to put up on the wall, she always tacked it way down at the end, never in the center. Beezus wished she could have a painting in the center of the wall. Hurry up, Ramona, Beezus coaxed. Then she noticed that her sister was dragging a string along behind her. Oh, Ramona, she protested. Why did you have to bring Ralph with you? Ralph was an imaginary green lizard. Ramona liked to pretend she was leading by a string. And here's something to imagine. Here, Ginger, do you want to see it too? Look it. I love Ralph, said Ramona firmly, and Ralph likes to go to the park. Beezus knew it was easier to pretend along with Ramona than try to get her to make her stop. Anyway, it was better to have her pretend to lead a lizard than to pretend to be a lizard herself. Can't you carry him? She suggested. No, said Ramona. He's slimy. When the girls came to the shopping district, Ramona had to stop at the drugstore scales, pretend to weigh herself, while Beezus held Ralph's string. I weigh 11 pounds, she announced. Well, Beezus smiled at Ramona's idea of her weight. It just goes to show how much imagination Ramona has, she thought. At the radio and phonograph store, Ramona insisted on petting his master's voice, the black and white plaster dog, bigger than Ramona, that always sat with one ear cocked in front of the door. A radio and phonograph store. That'd be something interesting. I bet you don't know what that is. You should look it up. Beezus thought admiringly about the amount of imagination it took to pretend that a scarred and chipped plaster dog was real. I want to see what she's saying. She's just looking outside. Nothing that exciting. If only she had an imagination like Ramona's, maybe Miss Robbins would say her paintings were free and imaginative, and would tack them on in the middle of the wall. When they reached the park, Beezus left Ramona and Ralph at the sandpile, and feeling more and more discouraged at her own lack of imagination, hurried to the rec center. The class had already poured paints into their muffin tins and were painting on paper thumbtack to drawing boards. The room hummed with activity. Miss Robbins, wearing a fun paint-smeared smock, flew from one artist to another, praising, correcting, suggesting. Beezus waited until Miss Robbins finished explaining to a boy that he should not outline a mouth with black paint. Her mouth wasn't outlined in black, was it? Then Beezus said, I'm sorry I'm late, Miss Robbins. She stared in fascination at Miss Robbins' earrings. They came almost to her shoulders and were made of silver wire, twisted and bent into interesting shapes. Not the shape of anything in particular, just interesting shapes. And here's the picture of her, if you can see it. That's all right, Miss Robbins. Her earrings swinging, smiled at Beezus. Get your paints and paper. Today, everyone is painting an imaginary animal. An imaginary animal? Beezus repeated blankly. How could she possibly think of an imaginary animal? As Beezus poured paints into her muffin tin and tacked a sheet of paper to her drawing board, she tried to think of an imaginary animal. But all the animals she could think of, cats, dogs, cows and horses, lions and giraffes, were discouragingly real. Reluctantly, Beezus took the only vacant seat, which was beside a boy named Wayne, who came to the class only because his mother made him. Once Beezus had hung her sweater on the back of a chair, and Wayne had printed "Post No Bills" on it in chalk. Beezus had worn it all the way home before she discovered it. Since then, she did not care to sit beside Wayne. Today, she noticed he had parked a grape-flavored lollipop on a paper towel beside his muffin tin of paints. Hi, Bees, he greeted her. No fair licking my sucker. It's more fun to see the dog than me. I don't want your old sucker, answered Beezus, and don't call me Bees. Okay, Bees, said Wayne. At that moment, the door opened, and Ramona walked into the room. She was still dragging the string behind her, and she looked angry. "Why, hello," said Miss Robbins pleasantly. "Oh, Ramona, you're supposed to be playing in the sand pile," said Beezus, going over to her. "No," said Ramona flatly. "Howie threw sand on Ralph." Her dark eyes were busy taking in the paints, the brushes, the drawing boards. "I'm going to paint," she announced. "Mother said you were supposed to play in the sand pile," protested Beezus. "You're too little for this class." "You say that about everything," complained Ramona. Then she turned to Miss Robbins. "Don't step on Ralph," she said. "Ralph is a make-believe green lizard. She pretends she leads on a string." Beezus was embarrassed at having to explain such a silly thing. Miss Robbins laughed. "Well, here is a little girl with lots of imagination. How would you like to paint a picture of Ralph for us, Ramona?" Beezus could not help feeling annoyed. Miss Robbins was letting Ramona stay in the class, the one place where she was never allowed to tag along. Miss Robbins would probably like her painting, because it would be so full of imagination. Ramona's pictures, in fact, were so full of imagination that it took even more imagination to tell what they were. Ramona beamed at Miss Robbins, who found a drawing board for her and a stool, which she placed between Beezus and Wayne. She lifted Ramona onto the stool. "There, now you can share your sister's paints," she said. Ramona looked impressed at being allowed to paint with such big boys and girls. She sat quietly on her stool, watching everything around her. "Maybe she'll behave herself after all," thought Beezus, as she dipped her brush into blue paint. "And now I don't have to sit next to Wayne." Since Beezus still had not thought of an imaginary animal, she decided to start with the sky. "Do the sky first," Beezus whispered to Ramona, who looked as if she did not know how to begin. Then Beezus faced her own work, determined to be free and imaginative. To be free on a piece of paper was not as easy as it sounded, she thought. Miss Robbins always said to start with the big areas of a picture and paint them bravely and boldly, so Beezus spread the sky on her paper with brave, bold strokes. Back and forth across the paper she swept her brush, brave and bold and free. That was the way to do it. Her sky turned out to be too wet, so while it dried a little, Beezus looked at what the other boys and girls were doing. Celia, who sat on her left, had already filled in a brave, bold background of pink, which she had sprinkled with big purple dots. Now she was painting a long gray line that wound all over her paper, in and out around the dots. "What's that supposed to be?" whispered Beezus. "I'm not sure yet," answered Celia. Beezus felt better, because Celia was the kind of girl who usually knew exactly what she was doing, and whose pictures were often tacked in the center of the wall. The boy on the other side of Celia, who always wanted to paint airplanes, was painting what looked like a giraffe made of pieces of machinery, and another boy was painting a thing that had two heads. Beezus looked across to Ramona, to Wayne. He had not bothered with the sky at all. He had painted a hen. Beezus knew it was a hen, because he had printed in big letters, "This is a real hen," with an arrow pointing to it. Wayne always tried to do just the opposite of what Miss Robbins wanted. "Hey, quit peeking," said Wayne in a loud voice. "I'm not peeking," said Beezus, hastily trying to look as if she had been interested in Ramona's paper all the time. Ramona had dipped her brush into blue paint and had painted a stripe across the top of her paper. "That's the sky," she said happily. "But that's not the way the sky is." Beezus was trying to be helpful. She felt better because Ramona had not plunged in and painted a picture full of imagination. The sky should come down on the paper. "The sky is up," Ramona said firmly. Beezus decided she wouldn't waste time explaining about skies, not when she still hadn't thought of an imaginary animal. Maybe she could take a real animal and sort of change it around. "Let's see," she thought. "I could take a horse and put feathers on it. Now all those feathers would be too hard to paint. Wings? That was it. A horse with wings was an imaginary animal, a real imaginary animal, because Mother had once read aloud a story about Pegasus, the winged horse, out of a library book. In the story, Pegasus had been white, which was a real horse color. Beezus decided to be extra imaginative. She would make her horse green, a green horse against a blue sky. Miss Robbins ought to like that. Beezus did not think blue and green looked very pretty together, but Miss Robins often liked colors that Beezus thought did not really go together. Okay, well that's where I'm going to end today, and tomorrow we'll continue. I hope you enjoyed having my guest who ran away at a few minutes ago. And tomorrow we will have another read aloud. All right, have a great day. Oh, actually, we'll wait till Monday till our next read aloud. Okay, thanks. Have a good weekend.